Ancient Pompeii from above. We present to you today original footage in collaboration with Pompeii Sites. It's a chance to explore the city like you've never done before. In particular, in this video, we'll be examining the forum space of Pompeii, the theater district in Region 8, and the amphitheater in Region 2. Starting off then in the forum, which is largely configured with this large temple of Jupiter in the northern end, along a large piazza, 135 meters long and 38 meters wide, largely developed in the 2nd century BC, of course in the Roman era, from the time it becomes a colony in the 80s BC on to the imperial period up until its destruction in AD 79. There are a lot of new additions to the forum space, and we'll be examining them one by one. We'll take a look at the placement, first of all, of the forum within the city of Pompeii in Region 7. I'm in the forum of Pompeii, a magnificent space. There's the temple of Jupiter, the temple of Apollo, the basilica, the Eumachia building right here, and a couple of other imperial shrines, and finally the Macellum. But what looms large here is Vesuvius. Our route today consists of the following. We'll be entering from the northern portion of the forum next to the temple of Jupiter of the 2nd century BC, which is eventually made into a triad Capitoline type Jupiter temple after Rome makes Pompeii into a colony in 80 BC. We'll go past the Macellum, a structure made for buying and selling of fish and spices, a veritable market which flourishes throughout the Roman Empire, a shrine of the public Lares. A shrine we'll enter into is that of the Genius Augusti, then past the Eumachia building, which was owned by and financed by a wealthy woman, Eumachia, who installs in it a shrine to Concordia in the age of Augustus. And then to the southern end, a series of municipal buildings, and then over to the western side, we'll enter the basilica, pass by the sanctuary of Apollo, originally built in the 6th century BC, take a look at the office of weights and measures, and finally then to a warehouse which is being used as a warehouse still today, and then pass through a second honorary arch once lined with marble, flanking the western side of the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. We start off going past these bollards that would have blocked wheeled traffic from coming into the forum space of Pompeii. So we're entering from the north. To our right, the temple of Jupiter, and to the left, the Macellum. And here it is with the central area, which would have been surrounded by a portico for the buying and selling of produce and goods. Past the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus in the Roman era, which dominates the forum still today. And we're pivoting over towards the shrine of the public Lares, and we'll take a look at the wall here, once lined with marble, for the shrine of the Genius Augusti of the imperial age. And of course, this wall of brick, once lined with marble, is typical of the insertion of buildings in the imperial period. And we can take a look at the altar that still stands in front of the small temple, and we can see a sacrifice is being made. We have the victimari, attendants with the sacrificial victim, the bull, and of course we have lots of religious implements that were used in the process of sacrifice. It's all about the worship of the emperor here in the 1st century AD, with a lot of religious implements on this lovely altar, which would have been used to make sacrifice to honor the persona of the deities. Past the building of the Eumachia, we're now in the southern end of the forum, and there are many statue bases that still stand. but they don't have the ancient statues intact anymore. On the southernmost end, we'll see a series of municipal buildings, including the Comitium for the local government to take part in. And we're heading now over to the western side, where we can see still today it's flanked by a series of colonnades, which would have been for the covered porticos originally on all sides of the Forum Piazza. You can pass through the portico and head into the basilica, which dates back to the 2nd century BC. This gives us an idea of the earlier basilicas of the Republican era in Rome itself. So this had about 300 years of use, with its columns made of brick covered over in stucco. Then to the large complex, the Temple of Apollo, which goes back to the 6th century BC, a magnificent addition to the Forum space. This small office of weights and measures for wet and dry materials to be measured out, with the original inscription still intact. And just to the north of it, there is a large warehouse being used today as a warehouse, with many of the materials found in excavations throughout the history of Pompeii's excavations. What dominates it are amphorae, are terracotta manufactured goods, but we also have marble, we also have some casts that remind us of the great loss of life with the eruption of Vesuvius in 79. We're heading over to the western side of the Temple of Jupiter, past the other honorific arch, which would have once been lined with marble, and passing along again this great large podium of the Temple of Jupiter that lines the northern end of the Forum of Pompeii. And these porticos are magnificent, restored, and give us a moment to pause and remember that go for more content at ancientromelive.org. We've got articles, a newsletter, and video seminars. It's all on a big calendar. So we're passing over the sanctuary of Apollo. And just south of it, past its own precinct wall, we're catching a little view of the basilica. And of course, we're starting to pick up the streets that lead into the Forum, and in particular, the Porta Medina Gate is just off to the west, pivoting now into the Forum again, dominated to the north by that Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, and the red roof covers the warehouse. Just south of it is the Office of the Weights and Measures, and to the east, the Shrine of the Genius of Augustus and the Macellum, as we pause and reflect at the expanse of great Pompeii. Now we're heading down the Via dell'Abbondanza. To the left here, we get a piece of the building, a magnificent building of Eumachia. And we're making our way to our next stop. We're heading to the theater district. We can check out the newly reopened Domus Cornelia. We're just a stone's throw away from the theater, the Grand Theater right here, and the Temple of Isis. So we can get familiar with the neighborhood of Pompeii, exploring these houses and understanding the context in which each individual house is located. Here, or right behind a very boisterous, a very social setting, the Greek theater, and then very well preserved, the Temple of Isis, cordoned off with its own private wall. Isis was a popular deity in Italy from at least the 2nd century BC. Here's a famous fresco from Pompeii. We know so much about the activities from literature, from archaeological remains, and from frescoes like this from Herculaneum. But it's that temple of Isis, the Iseum, which is almost entirely intact, that gives us a great sense of the popularity of the cult. And it's right there in the theater district, the first temple to be restored after the great earthquake in 62. And it holds its own as a great site in the expansive archaeological park of Pompeii. There's the great theater of the 2nd century BC, built on a natural slope in the city of Pompeii. The Temple of Isis is right behind it. And of course, also right behind it is the triangular form going back to the 6th century BC, still today lined with this series of columns. And just past it, then we see to the left here, the outer wall of the theater. Passing through this entrance would lead you to your seats for a grand spectacle. You can also take this staircase down to see the adjacent portico system. Vesuvius tells us there's always a portico system next to a theater. And this theater held about 4,000 spectators. Of course, it has a skene franz building of the Augustan age. These buildings were continually restored as they remained in use throughout the centuries. And the portico ultimately, in its final years, is converted into barracks for the gladiators. Such was the popularity, the increased popularity of this sport that the Romans brought to the city once it became a Roman colony in 80 BC. The colony also brought a music hall, the Odeion, which would have had its own covering. It's much smaller than the theater, but it's a more intimate space, and the acoustics were amazing. Now we can leave this behind and go to our final stop. We're heading over to the district, Region 2, with the Amphitheater, which becomes a reality of Pompeii once it's a Roman colony in 80 BC. And it is such an amazing structure because it is the oldest dated permanent stone amphitheater that we have from the Roman world. So still in 80 BC, amphitheaters were made of wood and they were temporary structures in Rome. Here in Pompeii, the veterans who settled in this colony after the Social War wanted a permanent venue. And here it was for about 15 to 20,000 spectators, which is saying a lot since the city of Pompeii was much smaller. And here we can see it today, well intact, next to a grand palestra. And we can head inside to get a sense of the scale of this structure that measures almost 67 meters by 34 meters. It was truly an extraordinary space for its day. It's still impressive to behold it today. And of course, what we have here are a series of arcades that lead up the staircases to get to the upper decks. There's not another amphitheater that looks like this in the Roman world. It's an early structure. It's a kind of a prototype for what we'll see later on in the Colosseum and other imperial structures. Still again, we see the close proximity in this area between the amphitheater here And then we also have, just across the way, this magnificent palaestra structure, which was in the process of being refurbished at the time of the eruption in AD 79. And a great piece of evidence that we have from a fresco in Pompeii shows riots taking place in that very amphitheater, in the next door palaestra, and it was so brutal, but at the same time, this fresco shows us all the details, like the velarium that kept people in the shade. It shows us that particular series of arcades for the stairs to get you up to the upper decks. And we feel then that connection with the people of Pompeii, the people that remembered the riots that took place in AD 59, that violence, that example of a moment in time that got the attention of the Senate and banned gladiatorial games for 10 years in the city of Pompeii, that was fated to be destroyed in AD 79. Well, we hope you like these views of Pompeii and our many other videos. We have almost 200 videos on our YouTube channel. Do check out ancientromelive.org for weekly videos and articles about these videos. It's a unique way to learn about Rome and Empire and see just how much the Romans still affect us today. Thanks for watching.